I'm here today with Anna Randall, and Anna is VP Sales at TigerEye. I'm going to let Anna tell us a little more about that. But Anna, welcome. It's so great to have you on our episode today.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to be here. Yep, Anna Randall. I work over at TigerEye, VP of Sales. It's been a journey to that position. I started out as an inside sales support in manufacturing. So I worked at a company. Back then it was called Eaton. Now it's owned by Danfoss, but covered a segment for Caterpillar. A lot of accounts across the world for a brand that's very well known. And from there, moved into SaaS software working for Oracle, where I was a bit like a boot camp. Cut my
A lot of cold calling, right?
a lot of cold calling, cut my teeth in field sales there, and learned a lot about SaaS products. Where I got a phone call that changed everything to move into a startup, and that was a phone call from a recruiter at PlanGrid, and ended up making a change over there and took a 4-year stint leading sales at PlanGrid before we were acquired by Autodesk. Stayed on at Autodesk for 4 years after that. And when the original founders of PlanGrid started TigerEye, I was asked to come join that team. And here I am today, leading sales at
Oh,
TigerEye.
that's fantastic. But let's go back to when you got out of college.
Yeah.
You had this inside support role. How did you make a jump to a very sales focused company like Oracle in sales? Did you know somebody there, or was it just fate? Or I'm curious because some people make an intentional move. It's usually within their company, but you went to another organization. Just curious if you don't mind.
Yeah. So while I was covering my own accounts and working, we were using Oracle for our CRM system. And we had a project where we were trying to upgrade our solution. So I actually was picked, I think, probably because I was the youngest by a long shot, but also maybe the most technical on the team to be a part of that team to help with the upgrade and to help the Oracle configuration team, the Siebel project. So I was working closely on the software project to upgrade the entire platform. And I think it just sparked some interest in what I could learn about software as an industry. And during that time, I actually got to know some of our executive team at my own company. And there was a time when it just happened to spark a conversation where an executive there said, there's more opportunity outside of here. Yes, this is a great job. This is a great company, but SaaS software is a big world and it's got a lot of opportunity, and there's different things to explore if that's a place that you want to go. They had some connections, and I put myself out there and applied for a role, which is also local in Minneapolis. Oracle had a big presence back then
Yeah.
in the town area. Was able to, it's fortunate when where you live has opportunity like that.
Yeah.
And was able to get in at a role downtown, and it was a grueling interview process. I'll be honest. Oracle's a tough shop, but once you're in, it's really fun. I was able to make that jump, it was interesting and overwhelming for the first, I would say, 8 months, because the terminology between manufacturing and SaaS software is wildly different.
Yeah. And it was very male majority at Oracle, right?
Yeah. At that time, they were hiring a little bit different. They were rolling out a class of programs. So you had some younger folks coming in, and there was a little bit more diversity because they were looking to change things up a bit. But you definitely had most of the senior leaders and most of the leadership was male dominated. And they were also often overhired. So you were like 10 to 1 rep to manager. So you often also didn't have a lot of face time in terms of training, onboarding. You were given an account list and a computer and said, "Oh yeah, here's your
There
number.
you go. Yep.
Here's the
There's your
phone.
phone.
Get going."
I'm familiar.
Yeah, you're expected to do a lot with what you had. It was for people that were ambitious and wanted to get after it. I think there was a lot of room to grow, and you also had a lot of people that were in the same boat. So you made friends quickly, and you learned strategies together. You fostered a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration. and definitely made a lot of mistakes. So a lot of learning.
Yeah, the sink or swim mentality when you're in a role like that. And I bet being in office with other people that you could hear their calls and things like that, that's one of the great things about being in office. I'm all for remote. I think remote's great, but that is something that I think helps the newer sellers is being able to hear somebody get hung up on or them laughing about it or being able to handle a question out of the blue and debriefing afterwards to your cube mate or the person across from you. Don't you think there was some good value in that?
Oh, and it was motivating, right? You'd hear one person make a call that would last more than 30 seconds, or they would get through to somebody and not be hung up on it. It would motivate you to dial 10 more numbers to try to get through to somebody as well. So it was a bit of the whole environment was meant to give you some confidence, but also make sure that you were held accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Accountability is important. I know one of the things that you like to talk about is authenticity in sales and how do you stay or how do you be authentic when I it can be hard, I think, sometimes to be authentic. We often try to mimic other people. I always like to find the most successful people and do what they do, but still be true to myself. What ideas do you have around authenticity?
That was something I struggled with the first when I started in corporate America at that job in Oracle. I would say that was probably one of the things I struggled with the most. And as I grew out of that, and especially when I started at PlanGrid, it's something that came a little bit more natural. And it might have been because in the startup world, you're given a lot more freedom to try more things. There's less scripts. And I was maybe just a little bit more mature because I had more years under my belt. But
Oh,
it's definitely one of those things where the more real you are with who you are, the more the buyer believes what you're selling. There's this trust that you need to convey with anybody that's buying anything that you're selling. And if you can cut through some of the time that it takes to build that credibility, I think that just cuts down any time in a sales cycle. So trying to convey that to anybody that I've coached or anybody that I've mentored or anybody that I've managed were just lessons that I felt weren't given to me early in my sales career. And so I try to teach those to people right out of the gate that if you are whatever you're into, whatever way that you talk to your best friends, whatever way you talk to your family, bring those things into the way that you sell. Don't try to read the script the way everyone else does. Don't try to fit into the box exactly. Let those little glimmers of yourself come through because it builds that credibility really quickly with the customer.
yeah, credibility and trust. And that's what is so important. That people are not going to engage with you too much unless they feel like what you're talking about, you're trustworthy, you're looking at their best interest. And I think just being buyer focused takes us being as transparent as we can be within reason, right?
Yeah. And I think part of that is human connection. People don't, especially in the age of AI, nobody wants to be sold to from an automatic recording. People don't want to be sold to by robots.
Right.
A script is helpful. People need to know, especially as you're getting started, you need to know what to say, how to say it. There's prompts and words that need to be memorized on some front. Yes, those things are important. You need to know what to say and when to say it. And then those jobs are pressure filled. Cold calling is pressure filled for sure.
Yeah.
And it's important to have something to lean back on. But leaning back also on things that you know to be true about yourself are almost easier than leaning back on a script about a product or a company. So I think teaching those things and letting those things shine in your team or in yourself as a seller are also really important.
Yeah, that's really important. And being in a company now, TigerEye, where your product is based around generative AI, what do you think about all the frenzy around we're gonna all lose our jobs? And, how we really need to focus on the human factors that AI can't replace.
Luckily, we're only replacing parts of the business that have to do with the business intelligence. So the numbers, the math, the parts of the job that nobody really likes. So hopefully people will love that piece of it and they get to do the strategic, the human part of the job more often. So that part is great about TigerEye. I think there is definitely room in the world for both things. There's always parts of jobs that people don't love doing. And the more we can automate that and free up resources to do the parts of the jobs that we love, which are often the human connection piece, the talking to, the asking questions, the creative side of the work, the stuff that honestly I don't think will ever be able to be outsourced. I think that's the goal of technology. So I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful that even in selling, there's bits of the job that sellers and sales folks don't love doing. And I hope those
Yeah.
things can be automated as best possible.
Certainly research. That's what SDRs and BDRs spent most of their day doing so much research. And
Give it to me.
we've seen that change, and now they can focus on higher level aspects. And that requires more training, and it requires people who are able to bring more value. So I feel like that the salespeople that didn't know what they were doing and just, or maybe were not coachable, maybe didn't know how to sell, a lot of those people are not around in sales now. And it's allowing for us to do higher value things with the salespeople that we have. Do you feel that way?
I do. And I think that the people that will continue to thrive in these environments are going to be the same ones that pace during any hard times, right? The ones that were able to think creatively during unprecedented times during COVID or thought outside the box during difficult times in the economy. We sold construction when construction was at some of its lowest times. I worked in manufacturing when manufacturing was at some of its lowest times. It was the
Yeah.
best sellers that thought, okay, how do I overcome these things that are completely outside of my control that I don't have to fight against, but I want to work around?
Yeah.
That those are the folks that rise to the top that will continue to rise to the top. If you fight against I think you'll probably be left behind. But if you figure out how to work with it, I think you'll probably continue to rise. And I feel like there's patterns in those people, and they are often very creative. They're often
Yes.
the box thinkers. They're often also very fun people. So I feel like you can pick
Yeah.
that of
It's
a crowd.
funny because when I was young, I was very creative, doing a lot of arts and crafts and things like that. And as I got older, I'd put the music aside and I put all the arts and but then one day in sales, I realized you have to be creative because sometimes we have to come up with alternate ideas that what we're doing isn't working and we need to try other things. And creativity is hugely important. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Another thing you talk about is a lone wolf mentality. And sometimes as individual contributors and as leaders as well, I think we can get stuck in our own heads. What do you how do you eliminate that mentality?
It probably goes back a little bit to my roots, born and raised in Minnesota. Out here, we've got a camp that every kid goes to called Wolf Ridge. There's a lot of wolves in Minnesota. We've got a lot of places where we preserve wolves. And so we learn about wolves a lot. And a lone wolf is actually a very sad thing. It means that they've actually been left out from the pack because they cannot keep up anymore. They're usually very elderly or they're sick or they're injured. And it means that they actually cannot perform at the level that everybody else in the pack can. And they're actually going to bring the pack down. And so the pack leaves them behind.
Oh,
And
it's
so
so
the
sad.
idea a lone wolf is actually not a top performer. They are not somebody that I think in sales, we try to flip that as somebody that's, I'm better than everybody else and I don't need the rest of the team. But the actual meaning of the word is the inverse of that. So when I've managed teams, I always try to think about that. Like we want to bring everybody in. And if you feel like you're alone on an island, that might have been my fault as a manager that I've done something where I haven't brought you in and there might be something that we're missing that you need. And so, what can we do to make sure that you've got everything to be successful? And where I want a team to focus is on the strength in learning from one another, being able to protect each other from missing deals or missing deadlines or letting things fall through the cracks, having each other's back. And if somebody's wins a deal, celebrating together. If somebody, has something that doesn't go their way, making sure they feel supported and they'll get the next one or whatever that looks like. But having that pack mentality so that there's nothing that they can't handle. I think it just many hands make light work, and that's a good mentality. And
That's great.
it's just one of those sayings that I think always got under my skin was
Yeah.
that people used to brag about being a lone wolf, and I was like, "You have it all wrong. You have it
Yeah.
all wrong. That's not a good thing." So
I
it's
love
something
that.
that I try to change the mentality of on my teams.
That's a really great perspective. I appreciate hearing that. And also having focusing on mindset is so powerful too, right? And we need grit in sales. How do you hire for that and how do people in sales survive without it? I don't think we do.
Uh, Yeah, I think it's grit is one of those funny words where I think you could ask a lot of people what grit is, and they'd all give you a little bit of a different definition of it. Um, for me, I played a lot of sports growing up. I wasn't naturally gifted in anything. I'm 5 feet tall. Neither of my parents are very tall. I don't have any God given abilities for a single particular sport, but I was coachable and I was a good listener and I was always willing to give it my all. And I showed up and I was determined. So I think there's a lot of ingredients that can go into grit, perseverance being one of them, the ability to get up day after day and give it your all, whatever word that falls under. I think there's a lot of words that categorize into that, but there's just this sense of doing, being a doer. And in sales, you have to really want to be a doer. When I was hiring at PlanGrid, I used to tell people all the time, this job is not hard. You call people, you tell them about a product that's phenomenal, and then you ask them for money. It's not hard. And most people say yes. The product was so good. That's all you have to do, but you have to work really hard to do well here. So you have to decide, is that what you want to do? Do you want to work hard? Because if you do not want to work hard, you're not going to work for me. And
Yeah.
if you want to go try to not work hard, but do very hard work, but very little of it, you're going to have to go work somewhere else. Because that there are roles like that where you just have to try a little bit, but it's really hard work for a little bit of time. There's opportunities like that out there. So it's just what grit looks like depends on the role, depends on the company, and depends on sometimes even the product that you're selling. But each team and each manager and each company really has to think about what grit means to them and what it's going to take to get to the goals that they have, and maybe even what that year looks like, because sometimes each year in the same company can require different types of grit to get through whatever is coming for that year.
Yeah, that's a great point. We consider it will versus skill.
Yeah.
And we all need skills, but those can be taught. You
Yeah.
can teach anyone skills, but you really can't teach them will or grit. Like you show up with that or not.
Yeah. The fire in the belly, I used to say, you got to want it. And I don't need people to be obsessed with things, but
Yeah.
I need them to want it as bad as I can't want it more than they do.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
As a single mom, I was out to prove to the world that I did make good decisions, even though I was a very young single mom. And I did have a plan, and every success just confirmed that for me. And it was the great thing about selling is that you know where you stand at any time. It's
Yeah.
you don't have to wonder, "Oh, I wonder what my boss thinks." You're either selling or you're not. You're either taking actions that lead to sales or you're not.
I used to tell people we can break it down here. What are your goals? And you don't need to sugarcoat it with me. It's not to if your goal is you want to buy a boat at the end of the year, tell me it's to buy a boat. Tell me how much the boat costs. Let's start a virtual piggy bank for it and let's fill it up. Let's figure it out. And
I
I think
agree.
when you get real tactical about these are people that are willing, when you're coaching salespeople, they are willing to gamble 30, 40, 50% of their salary and bet on themselves. That says a lot about a salesperson. There's hardly anybody else in the company that's 50% of their salary on themselves, especially at startups where other teams miss deadlines. They don't pump out product when they say they will. They don't solve support problems when they say they will. And you're lucky if you're at a team, at a company where all of those things always go the right direction. And I've been lucky enough to be on teams where they have. I've been on teams where they haven't. And with the only certain folks that are taking variable pay have to show up and do it themselves. And it just says a lot about folks that do that. And I think it's really fun to hire. I think it's so fun when you have a team that shows up and wants to do that for themselves. And then it's just so magical when you have a team that shows up for each other. That's when you know you've really struck like gold, is when you
Yeah.
have a team that shows up for each other.
Yeah, for sure. And in the old days when I started in sales, I was on straight commission.
I haven't 50/50s as far as I've gone, but I've heard of those types
Scary.
of jobs. That is a big gamble, and I commend anybody that has been able to do that.
Yeah, you get a
That is
90-day draw,
gold.
and that was it. It was you better figure it out quick. And luckily, I got in just like you were saying, there was lots of opportunity. I got into tech when it was first starting in the mid 80s. And there was one of the guys that hired me said, there's more here in scraps than anywhere else. And they were true. It was true. So I was very fortunate in that. Is there a book or video or podcast or anything that you'd recommend to others?
Yeah, if people haven't read the book literally named Grit by Angela Duckwell, I think it's just a great book that sets up a lot of the foundation of, I mean, her perspective on it gives you the psychology behind how you're not born with things, but I think she lays out a really good foundation. I give that book to anybody that I hire just to let them know how I think about it, but that is usually the first book that I read. And then the second, it's a podcast that I listen to, but it's a very, very well-known book as well, but it's the Dale Carnegie. He has there's a whole podcast from Dale
It's a
Carnegie as well.
podcast? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he has a leadership podcast, or well, the Dale Carnegie program has a
Yeah,
leadership
not him,
podcast,
but
but
yeah.
How to Win Friends and Influence People is
Yeah.
obviously a great book.
When I was in my early 20s, I paid out of my own pocket to go to Dale Carnegie, put myself through a 12-week program, and it was great. It was really
That was the first sales class I ever took, and it was at Eaton at the time. They
yeah,
put me in it, and it was where you learned the sweetest sound is somebody's name, and I it stuck with me so hard that I have never stopped obsessing over saying people's names correctly
yes.
since that day.
Thank you, Anna Randall. Use your
Thank
name.
you.
Anna is VP Sales at TigerEye, and continued success, and we look forward to watching your career. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure it will impact other people who are listening.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me.